participants to this 12th session of Economics Research Seminar Series, which is organized by Department of Economics, IBA Karachi. Today, we are really thankful to Dr. Farina Mali for being with us. She is currently working as assistant professor at University of the Punjab, Lahore. She is also a Fulbright scholar, and she has completed her PhD from American University. Her research interests include applied microeconomics and behavioral economics, which are focused on gender, education, and health. She has also worked with Oxfam America. Today, she's presenting her a study, a very relevant study, which she has co-authored with Dr. Shahryar Binouri and Dr. Zahra Aftab, who also happens to be with us. Thank you so much, Dr. Zahra. The topic of her presentation will be When Norms Collide, the Effect of Religious Holidays on Compliance with COVID Guidelines. So before any further ado, it's over to you, Dr. Farina. And sorry to
Hey,
interrupt. If we have any if anyone has any questions, we will have a question answer session at the end of the presentation. So you can use the chat box or raise hand option. Thank you. Sorry, now over to you.
thank you. Thank you, Rabia. Thank you so much for having me. I want to thank Dr. Asma. Well, she's not here, but convey her that I'm really grateful for having me here for my recent research that I would be presenting here, and it's titled "When Norms Collide: The Effect of Religious Holidays on Compliance with COVID Guidelines." And I've co-authored this paper with Zahra Aftab and Shahryar Binouri, and I'm hoping both of them will join. I think Zahra is already here. So just a minute. Okay, so it is structured in a pretty standard way. We'll have a motivation, research question, the study design, the results, and then the conclusion. So diving straight into it. In this strange times, during a pandemic, when pharmaceutical interventions are still developing, really everybody is looking towards social and behavioral sciences to manage this pandemic and see or examine and analyze what the impacts would be. So we look into the what we have learned from our previous literature, and we see that perceived risk and trust in authorities are two of the key determinants that two of the key determinants for compliance. And so if you have high perceived risk and you think it's extremely risky, you would comply more. And similarly, if you trust the authorities more, you would listen to them and you would do as they are telling you to do. So you'll follow their instructions. However, more recently, there are more behavioral measures are being argued for, and the role of social norms and its efficacy in guiding the behavior, even in the absence of fear and anxiety. So what are social norms? Social norms are what ideas tell us to do, and and their approval and disapproval is found to be a powerful motivator. It really motivates your actions and your behavior. So there is literature that tells us how norms could be perceived inaccurately. So I could be what I believe are the perceptions of everybody else outside my house could be just inaccurate, and that could lead to underestimating the health promoting behaviors. For this reason, we have seen that norm-based interventions have taken place which try to correct these perceptions. So in one of the recent studies by Dickey et al., they see that the perception of social norms regarding hand washing is highly correlated with their own behavior of hand washing in a sample of UK students. Similarly, in a study by Berzenstein et al. In Saudi Arabia, see that once they correct the misperceived social norms regarding the preferences of women working outside the home, it changes the willingness of the partner, of the husband, to help find their wife employment. So if we correct these perceptions, that could really change the behavior. So norms are technically guiding our behavior and how we comply to certain behavior and certain guidelines. So what are we really looking into? We were interested in the effect of Eid al-Fitr, which is one of the biggest, most celebrated Muslim festivals, on compliance with COVID guidelines. And for that purpose, we survey a sample of college students in Pakistan who respond before and after Eid, the religious holidays. And this variation in the timings of the responses, which basically stems from the tardiness of administrators who were forwarded the survey at exactly at the same time. And we'll talk more about it, how this worked, and how we got the results. But right now, just to talk more about what Eid al-Fitr is, and most of you would be knowing it is the most important festival of Muslims, where the families go begin their day at the mosque, wearing a new dress, and they go together for their first midday meal in a month because of Ramadan. And females tend to decorate and clean their houses, dress themselves beautifully, mehndi, they cook food, and children enjoy. And please note that all this information has been taken from a website, The Holiday Spot. So the gendered tasks are not put in by me, but that's how they have perceived and they've written it. And this festival is celebrated for 3 days. So what is really colliding here? So the COVID norms, which were that we need to socially distance ourselves, we need to avoid travel, we need to work from home, we need to avoid social gatherings, wear a mask, wash hands, and avoid eating out. So that pretty much collided with Eid, which really told us to pray at mosque, which is again a congested place, visit the family, especially the elderlies, which apparently are the at the highest risk due to corona. Eat out lunch together as a family, visit friends, give presents, and basically converge for the whole day at the head of the family's house. So in terms of Pakistan, the first confirmed case of coronavirus was confirmed on February 26th. And on the week of March 23rd, the lockdown was implemented, of course, varying, the actual date varied by the province. Then on May 9th, the lockdown ends. However, the cinemas, theaters, restaurants, and schools remain closed. On May 16th, we sent out an email to the head of departments of different universities for the purpose of data collection. And then we have Eid from May 24th till May 26th, and then the data collection ends on June 5th. So also to give a sense of situation looked in those days, during those, we see that it was well, relatively it was more controlled before Eid, but after May 24th, which was the Eid day, that is when the peak started. The daily cases were really increasing. So here, the head of our leader, the Prime Minister, was appealing to the nation that we need to celebrate this festival in a more simplistic manner, and we need to be more cognizant of the fact that there's a pandemic going on, and we need to follow the SOPs. However, what our mobility data really tells us when we look into the Google mobility data, and we see that there is a difference between average percentage change. There's a change in your mobility before and after Eid. And over here, we are really comparing with the baseline, which is January and February. So we see that before and after Eid, the traveling for retail and recreation has increased. It has also the traveling for parks. There's a significant increase in that, and the transit stations, and also for mobility for the workplace. However, we also see that there's a 3.49% reduction in residential mobility. That is, there were 3.5 percentage points lower people staying at home as compared to the baseline in before and after, comparing the two samples. So if we look into this residential mobility separately, it's again Google mobility data, and we try to analyze how the mobility really looked before and after Eid. So we see there's a higher trend. We see a blip on the Eid day, so many less people. So residential mobility is basically percentage change in people who are staying at home or staying within the residence. So we see a blip. So a lot of people leave their homes on the Eid day, which is understandable. But then it goes up during the Eid holidays. But after that, we see see that overall there is a lower average, and there is a lower there's a reduction in people staying at home. So that means that there were more people going out of their residence as compared to the before Eid data. So how was the survey collected, and what were our primary measures? So we sent out, this is the exact text of the email that was sent out to the head of departments in various universities within Pakistan, and they were simply asked that we need to measure propensity to take risks and time preferences of the youth, and that's why they were requested to share that form, the Google form, with their student body, so that they could fill it out and we could get responses. Also, they were asked, the students were further asked to share it further with their families and other friends, so that there could be a snowball method too. So we are collecting data through both the ways. So one, directly we're approaching the universities, but then we have a snowball method of collecting data, which hardly got us any responses, but yet that was still there. So in this paper, we are really exploiting the tardiness of university administrators, and sorry to use that word, but it's basically that all the universities were sent out the invitation the same day. And while some university administrators responded immediately and shared those that survey with their student body immediately, some waited till after Eid, and that is when so it could be that they were busy, it could be that they just overlooked the email or anything like that, but no follow-up email was sent to anybody. It was just sent on 16th and 17th. And the survey was really measuring compliance with COVID guidelines, the preferences of the students, their perceptions, their socioeconomic status, and the basic demographics. And the data was collected from 16th May till 5th of June, so almost a week prior and a week after the Eid al-Fitr. And the timing of the surveys, that is basically allowing us to establish this impact of Eid, and the randomness, that how they were assigned and who was responding before or after, was not really selected by us. So here is a list of institutions who responded before and after. And so the institutions who responded before was primarily IBA. So thank you, IBA, for doing that. Primarily IBA, but then also University of Punjab and LUMS. And then after Eid, it was basically ITU, Government Postgraduate College for Women, and Akhtar Said Medical and Dental College. So that is how they were divided. Also, we saw that the responses came from each university came in clusters. So for instance, if they were shared the email today, like 80% of the responses were collected either today or tomorrow at maximum. The spread wasn't much, which really told us that that it really observed that students either responded, filled out the survey immediately when they saw the email, or they just never did it. So that is why we see those clusters. So the key compliance measures that we have are 6 of these. So they are basically metrics for measuring different kinds of compliance. So the first one is if you have reduced leaving home from Corona, and it had 3 options: no, yes, less, but I go out less. And the third one was yes, I go out very less. So that was if you're leaving your home. The second was if you're avoiding large crowds. The third is, which was the second, large crowds was measured over a scale of 0 to 10. Then the third one was if you're avoiding physical greetings, and that is a binary question, yes or no. If you're wearing masks, have stopped going to a mosque, and if have you reduced grocery shopping. So last 4 of them were like binary variables, and they had a response in yes and no, while the first 2, the reduce leaving home and avoid crowd crowds, they were converted into binary variables for our own analysis. The main control variables which we have really taken from the literature are that our compliance is determined by perceived risk. How do we perceive how do we perceive that how risky that is, and the fear that we have, how afraid are we of that particular virus. So this was measured, and then the second one was how much do we trust the authorities. So that was how factually truthful do you think your country's government has been about the coronavirus outbreak. So that was basically measuring the trust in authority. So these are the main explanatory variables. Apart from that, we also have other control variables which we have included in our regressions. So basic demographics, age, household income, and their time and risk preferences. So jumping into the data, we first of all, in this table, it is important to know that the self-perceptions, so we are just running a bivariate regression for this table, and we are seeing if the sample is different on each of these variables before and after Eid. So if that is insignificant, that means that there was no difference. So we see that the samples before and after Eid were really not different in terms of their self-perceptions, in the terms how they trusted the authority, and also their COVID-19 perception. So if they feared the corona, their perceived risk of corona, and if they thought the government and provincial government was taking appropriate action, so on. So we do not see any significant difference there. However, we do see significant difference in compliance, and it is generally negative. So there's lower compliance after Eid. As for the other measures, we see that the sample that we had after Eid, they were younger, they were less wealthy, they had lower socioeconomic status, and they had differences in their risk and time preferences. So as for the risk measures, we measured it using two methods. So one is self-assessment, and the other is basically they were given a hypothetical situation, and they had to tell us which one would they pick up, the more risky one or the less risky one. So based on literature, we just have less confidence in the measures that we have in the hypothetical situations. However, we are still controlling for them in our regressions. However, in the risk tolerance for the self-assessed one, that is not different between the before and after sample. And if we think that the averages could be deceptive, we just looked into the distributions of the primary determinants, that is the risk perceptions and the trust in authority before and after Eid, and see how they vary. And we can see that they're pretty much overlapping. And even for the COVID fear, we can see that there's a visibly slight difference between COVID before and after distributions. Yet statistically, when we check, they are not statistically different. For the trust in authority, they are pretty much overlapping, and the distributions are not different before and after Eid. So now coming back to our results. So over here, just to give you a background, a higher number implies that there's higher compliance. So a lower number would say less compliance. That's how all of the dependent variables are constructed. So the logit regression is ran. We ran a logit regression, and the main variable is the after Eid, which is equals to 1 if the response was after Eid, and 0 if before Eid. And we can see that throughout there is a negative sign, and it's statistically significant for 4 of the 6 social compliance indicators. So we see that there's a 10% decrease in leaving home. So people have started leaving home. There's 19% less compliance in terms of large crowds. There's 8% less compliance in terms of physical greetings, and there's 13% less compliance in mosque visits. And there is no difference in. So over here, we have control for our primary indicators, our primary determinants for compliance, but we have also controlled for other demographic like age and income and time and risk preferences. So basically, we see that the Eid norms are really really trumping the newly formed social norms that were just newly formed and were just in the making, and people were trying to get used to those. Now, as a robustness check, just to see that our results hold, and we use matching techniques, and we match over age, we match over the indicators of socioeconomic status, we match over if the student is working, and we match over the risk and time preferences. We match over all these factors, and then we see using the propensity score matching and the inverse probability matching, the results still stand. They do not change as much. We still see that they're negative, they're statistically significant. The magnitudes are slightly different, but otherwise, probably it's still telling us the same story. Now, since Pakistan is a very gendered society, and the what males and females are expected to do and how they're expected to behave in public or otherwise, or leaving home, it's extremely different. So we were expecting gendered results, and that's for that purpose we have uh, ran a separate regression in which we have an interaction variable of Eid and female. So over here, the Eid and the female, the coefficient of this interaction variable is really telling us the compliance of females after Eid, whereas just the after Eid is telling us the compliance of males after Eid. And when we compare, we see that only in the avoids leaving home indicator, females are complying less than the males. Whereas for all the rest, females are complying more, and it's mainly the men who are driving the lower compliance after Eid. For large crowds, for physical greetings, for mosque visits, and for the grocery visits, it's extremely interesting that in our primary results, it was insignificant. There was no effect. But when we segregated it by gender, we see that no effect, the insignificance was really coming out from the effect of because the males and females were really working in opposite directions. So the males are not complying less, whereas the females are complying far more. So that is why our results were insignificant when we look into there. So now let's talk about what other explanations could be there. That could be because since this is not a real experiment, it's a quasi experiment, there could be other loopholes which could be affecting or driving our results. And so I discussed like three of them, which primarily are the main ones. So it could be that the differences in institutions, the pre and post, because they are different institutions, they have different student bodies, that is driving our results. So basically the unobservable factors which drive different student bodies into different institutions, that is really affecting our, driving our results. The second one could be other events are taking place during this whole month-long window, the pre and post Eid, and basically those are changing the preferences and the compliances. And the third one is that the post-Eid responses to compliance questions are specific to behavior on Eid and not sustained beyond Eid. So going one by one, so discussing the first one, the differences in the institution. So we're really not aware of any research that is pointing towards association between the student quality and the compliance behavior. However, there is a lot of literature which sounds more convincing that the norms are a powerful motivator for your behavior. So though there is no way to segregate that because we do not have responses from the same students before and after Eid, or from the from the same student body of the same university from before and after Eid, we did a simple test, and we tried to check that in pre-Eid time we divided the sample into elite university students versus the non-elite university students. So before Eid we had the elite universities that students that responded were from IBA and LUMS, and the non-elite were Punjab University. So once we compare that, we see we should expect, if that is the case, we should expect that the elite students are either more compliant or there's a systematic difference between them. But we find that they have insignificant effect on compliance indicators, that variable, with the only exception of avoiding large crowds, which really tells, and that is also in the opposite direction, that the pre-Eid, the elite students are less compliant than the non-elite students. So that goes in the opposite direction, and we can refute that. The second could be that there are non-Eid related events. For instance, it was Ramadan, and when we started collecting, it was last 10 days of Ramadan, and just because it was Ramadan, nobody was going out, and therefore there was a temporarily increased compliance, and hence post-Eid period constitutes a return to the baseline. However, I think most of we should know that in the last 10 days of Ramadan are the busiest days because everybody is preparing for Eid, and they're going out, they're shopping, and they're preparing for the feasts, and they're getting more groceries. Also, in terms of religious activities, there are more gatherings, there are tarawis, and so on and so forth. So I don't think there was less compliance before Eid just because it was Ramadan. Rather, it was a busy time. Also, it could be that there are other policy or narrative shifts or differences in number of cases of fatigues. Well, given the small window, we do not expect that the policy was really shifting. It was just like 8 days prior and 12 days after Eid. So there was not a major shift in the policies. Also, we saw a steep increase in the Eid al-Fitr, yet there was no change in the preferences, which could have derived the change in compliance, but there was no effect in that, in the preferences before and after sample. Um, so third, the explanation could be that the people who are responding, the student body who are responding, they're really saying after Eid, they're responding, they're interpreting the question as compliance to be about the Eid celebration period, those like particularly those 3 Eid days, rather than the period following the Eid. So we conjecture that if that is the case, then the people who are responding immediately after Eid would have lower compliance, reported compliance, as compared to people who respond like a week or 10 days after the Eid. So to test it, we divide the sample in by the median date, which is approximately, I think, the 6th day of Eid or the 30th of May. And then we see if the compliance is really different in the post-Eid period. The compliance is reportedly different, systematically different between the before the median date and the after the median date. And we find that there is no systematic pattern here, but we cannot completely refute this too, because we do see that there is lower compliance. There's lower compliance in leaving home in the after median sample, yet there is higher compliance in the after median sample in terms of physical greetings and wearing masks. However, we also look into the Google Community Mobility data, which we also discussed earlier, and it supports our claim that the downward trend in the compliance did sustain after the Eid period. So it did sustain for 2 weeks or so after the Eid, and it is expected to sustain further. So concluding my talk, we find that there is a sustained reduction in most measures of compliance after the religious holiday in a homogeneous sample of college students, and we really interpret this as a shift brought about by long-standing religious norms overturning the norms related to compliance, which were basically absolutely new and weak at roots. So, and this drop in compliance is really attributed mainly to males, according to our data, and that is likely due to the gender norms. And these findings carry implications for other religious celebrations and events, as worldwide we are entering the holiday season with the Christmas coming up and the New Year coming up. So yes, and I think that is all. Yes, thank you so much, and I'm open for your questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Dr. Farina, for such an interesting presentation. So if anyone has a question, you can write it in the chat box or you can raise your hand. So we have a first question from Ejaz Ahmed. Please, sir. Sir, okay, we have a question from Shagufta Shabir. You can
Hi,
go first.
sorry.
Okay, no problem. Please, sir.
Hi, sorry, Rabia.
No problem, sir. Please.
I was trying to unmute myself. Thank you for the nice presentation. I'm Ejaz Ahmed from IB. I have one or two questions. One is that since you are investigating the determinants of compliance here, so I don't know, maybe you have included, but I haven't seen one or two important things. One is that how you're accounting for the religiosity in your estimates. For example, if there is more or less religious households and students from that households which is less or more religious could have different perceptions and could have different sense of precaution.
Right.
That's the number one thing that, which I would like you to elaborate on. And the second thing is that likewise, more than as you mentioned that there are some elite schools and there are some not very elite schools and so on, and you're also accounting for socioeconomic uh, variables. So there is one very important thing, and that is more than the socioeconomic factors and more than the elite versus not so elite schools. I think it's the family environment which matters the most. So besides the conventional covariates that you are using to account for that impact, do you have some specific variable which could disentangle this or which could capture this impact? So put it simply, some families have or some households have more compliance or they are more religious. These are my two questions. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much for asking such interesting questions. So yes, you're right. Religiosity is an important determinant, and we did collect on data. To be honest, it's not about their family, but it's about their own level of religiosity. So how religious are they on a scale of 0 to 10? And I did control for that. So when we looked into the descriptives, we see that the religiosity was really not different, and it was really not significant determinant of compliance for any of the indicators. So yes, we have data on that and we tried to control for it, but it really didn't give us any interesting results. But as for the family environment, unfortunately, we do not have any data in terms of how compliant their family members are. So we do not know if their parents are more compliant and if they're forcing them to comply, or if their parents are less compliant and they're forcing. So unfortunately, we do not have data on that, and I don't think that we have enough. We have anything that could really disentangle that. Because all we have is their income. But yes, so yes, I don't think we have much on that.
Okay, so next,
If
please, sir, please.
yeah, yeah, if I may come up again, one more interesting variable which I have observed somewhere in my research could be a dummy maybe for rural urban sort of background. That also might give something interesting into your research. So maybe you can check that as well. Thank you so much.
Yes, I'll do that. But I think we do not have the data on what their hometown is. But yes, you did raise out the correct point.
Okay, so interesting. Next up, we have Ms. Shagufta Shabar. Please, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Assalamualaikum, Dr. Farina. This is Shagufta.
Alaikum
I'm a
salam.
PhD student at IBA. And I just recently read your paper also, which I want to ask a question about. I want to ask a question about this very interesting presentation that you made. It's really interesting that you collected such a
Thank
data.
you.
But what I was thinking was this, that when you are collecting data specifically from students belonging to education institute, yes, I understand that there might be elite and non-elite educational institutes that you have tried to segregate them in. But don't you think that just by being in an education institute, that would automatically put these students in a particular socioeconomic group? Because you can't expect that people from very low income families would be part of this student body joining the university, especially because as we know that very low income family groups do not but the data shows that they are not able to achieve higher education. Now, and when we just make a general observation in the society, we see that these are the very people who are not actually following uh, the preventive measures. They are the ones we see most often in the grocery store, still doing the shopping like they normally used to do. So, how do you account for this thing?
As for the socioeconomic group, we agree that the validity, there is a limitation to the external validity of a paper, because of course we are just selecting, we have a selected group of students who are responding, and of course this is despite being the elite and the non-elite division, they're still the privileged ones within our country. So yes, so the external validity is kind of limited, but as compared to and when we look into the, as you said, the youth is the one who is really going out and going into the malls. So yes, you're right about it, and that's why we really want to see that how the elders or the adults, the older adults are still more compliant than these. So it was more interesting to find out how these students are really changing, or how their compliance is affected by the Eid. So, and as for the religious norms, when we say about religious norms are more entrenched and more religiously followed, more strictly followed by the adults and the older people of the household. And they really tell you that we need to go out and we need to meet family and we need to go to this person's place. So it could be the other way around too, that the older people are telling you what to do and not to do. So though we do not have data on that, but yes, it could go both ways.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Farina. I'm sorry I'm deviating from this topic, but I would like to take this opportunity to request for some kind of future correspondence with you regarding your paper aspirations being affected of BIS
Sure,
recipients.
sure.
So if that's all right, I would like to, because my research thesis is about the impact of BIS
Of
on
course,
the household dynamics.
of course, I'll ask Rabia to share my email with you.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, so we have another question, and Fasi Zulfikar, would you like to ask next?
Yes, thank you. I'm Fasi from my first year in IBA. My question is,
Hey.
couldn't the lockdown prior to Eid have made people even more likely to break COVID norms and enjoy themselves at Eid? Therefore, maybe the conclusion of the strength of religious norms isn't applicable here.
I'm sorry, can you just repeat it? Could the lockdowns do what?
Could the lockdown prior to Eid have made people even more likely to break the norms of COVID and
So,
enjoy themselves at Eid before the
so
Eid?
are you, so you're trying to say they're just fatigued
Yes,
and
exactly.
they're just fatigued. So yes, that's what I'm saying, that if they're fatigued, then they would be more fatigued in the later days of Eid in just than the days which were really immediately after Eid. And that was my last alternative explanation, in which we try to disentangle. So there's no real way of really disentangling that given the data. But just given an attempt, a simple attempt was that we divided the data by the median date in our post-Eid period, and see that if it is fatigue, then the people really after Eid would be more fatigued. So I think that is we do not really find systematic differences in that. So it really could not be explained by that. But yes, you're right that there could be that difference and there could be that factor, but there is no way to disentangle that apart from what we have done, and that doesn't show us any systematic differences.
Okay, so next we have Sayyid Murtaza Nadeem. Sir, please, you are next.
Assalamu alaikum. My
Welcome,
name is
Sam.
Murza and I'm currently a master student at IBA. And my question is related to the compliance factors. So, don't you think that the role played by religious leaders before and after Eid is also a major factor in this aspect? While although it is the data on this is difficult to collect, but you could, I think, this is a very important factor that could have been covered in this. So, what are your thoughts on this? The religious
Uh,
leaders, including imams and all these, so they have a major role
So as in what they were really preaching in their own masjids?
Yeah, exactly, in their sermons, in each sermon. So I think that played a very important role in the major population. So maybe you could discuss this as well.
Um, yeah, I mean that could be a factor along, but we try to really factor that in by how religious I am, because really what sermons they're giving in each masjid, it might have been difficult to just collect that, but how religious I am and how much would I listen to those imams could be captured by how religious I am, and that is what we did try to control. And as I said, there wasn't much difference on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have other question? Anyone else who has a question? Okay. I have just a little, I'm just curious about this thing that can we say that in Pakistan, people are generally risk takers and uh, they really don't comply with all these COVID guidelines, because when we see news, when we see outside, even when we have online classes and all that, but still we see a lot of students who are playing around and who are going to malls, who are going to restaurants. So we don't see that happening. Even if we just don't consider Eid, it's just in normal days as well. So is it because generally people in Pakistan have this
Well,
behavior?
yes, generally, yes. I think generally we are less compliant, but since it's not a cross-country comparison, just comparing Pakistanis with Pakistanis is really telling us that okay, fine, even we are Pakistanis, we are going below the threshold that even so we are beating ourselves basically after Eid.
But I think if I was I was watching news the other day, and I think it also is the case with other countries as well, in UK even, and in US even.
Yes.
Um, the, people are not really compliant towards these guidelines.
Yes, people, yes. So there are, well, they have the whole things that they're coming up against the lockdowns and everything, and they're coming out in the public. So yes, it's well, but generally, if you think that as people, yes, I think we are less compliant. It's difficult for us to make us understand that what is corona and why is it dangerous. But even though other people understand in more developed countries, they're still not complying.
Um,
Okay.
sorry,
See,
Yeah, Shahriar wants to add in, I think.
sorry, Rabia.
please, sir.
I hate to hijack, but I wanted to quickly say one thing on this, which is since वो पाकिस्तानियों की बात की है, one of the classic models of compliance, and Farina talked about this early on in the presentation, but I just wanted to underscore this, is this issue of trust in authorities. So when you have, for example, an uncertain type of situation like a pandemic happening where you might not have direct experience of it, but you might have indirect experience through news sources and things like that. Um, Trust in authorities is a strong predictor about compliance behavior. And in societies where trust levels tend to be low, and I no points for guessing which society I'm talking about. You would find lower levels of compliance, and in fact, even in the cases that you cite in the U.S., for example, you have, for example, certain segments of the society along political lines, I don't want to say Republicans, but generally conservatives, who are less compliant by virtue of the fact that they have lower levels of trust in government for all sorts of political and historical reasons. But I just wanted to sort of reinforce that point. Okay? It's not necessarily something about us being Pakistanis that make us less compliant, but this critical issue of trust that has been significantly been undermined in, you know, God knows how long, is a factor. Thank you.
That's
True.
very true. True. So, Dr. Ajaz had a raised hand. So you want to add?
Um,
We can't hear you.
hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so I just have a small comment. Since we are talking about pandemic and compliance to the safety measures, and the presenter is connecting that with a religious event. I would suggest to, maybe you have already done this, but I would suggest to include the religiosity variable, even if it comes non-significant, because that is something which is very important in this whole discussion. That is a variable which is central to this discussion. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for your suggestion. We can do that.
Okay, thank you. Anyone has any question?
Sorry,
Yes, please, Dr.
can I chime in on something for what Dr. Ajaz said? Thank you, Dr. Ajaz, for a good, really good comment. One thing I will say about religiosity, and I think this is an important feature. That being said, I mean the data that we have is a fairly homogeneous subsample. In terms of religiosity, I mean, we're talking about college students, and I fully acknowledge that college students have some variance on religiosity. But oftentimes, when we think about like religiosity and compliance, we are thinking about certain tails of the religiosity, right? Like, on the religiosity spectrum. So, like the extreme levels, and not for calling out names, but all the people that attended Khadim Hussain Rizvi's funeral is an example of this. And so, where even though, I mean, I think we are controlling for religiosity in some of the regressions, but I suspect we're not really going to be able to find what we're looking for because of that. One is कि हमारा वैसे ही variation on religiosity is not likely to be that much. But then the other thing about religiosity is that it operates through this, again, this trust and risk perceptions channel. You know, you have less trust, which leads to less compliance and so on. And so some of those are actually already perhaps capturing this. But at the same time, I mean, I agree. We agree with you that it's an important thing to keep in mind for this analysis. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have other questions? You have
Rabia,
something to
can I
say?
ask a question?
Ji, sir, please.
Okay, okay. Thank you, Dr. Fazina, for the wonderful presentation. I'm Muhammad Nadeem Sarwar, PhD student at IBA.
Hey.
Actually, I'm doing research on tax compliance, and I discussed my research with Dr. Shahriyar a much time ago. I don't know if he remembers or not. So in that, in tax compliance research, I've studied that the behavior of a person it also depends on how the people around you are behaving. So don't you think this will also come in this discussion? And if you could have a question on how your friends are taking these COVID situation serious, that could have done something significant.
Right. So, well, this was already the lockdown period. So the students were already back in their homes, even if they were attending online classes. So it's, I think, more than friends, it would be the family who would be influencing them, either imposing restrictions and making them comply or making them less compliant. So we do not have data on how their family is complying to social behaviors, and if only if we had that could have been useful, and how their family is affecting. But generally, we see that the youth is what is problematic. That it's the youth that is problematic, and they're less compliant as compared to elder adults generally. So I think. While that could be an important determinant, we do not have data on that. So yes, but otherwise, yes, that is exactly what we're seeing, how norms are affecting. So it is what your family expects you to do on Eid, and how that affects your compliance. So yes, in a way that we are looking into the same thing, but just not controlling for how their family is complying to these guidelines, the COVID guidelines.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't have any more questions. So thank you so much, everyone, for participating. Unfortunately, Dr. Asma Heather couldn't be with us. She had to attend an urgent meeting, but she's very grateful to all of you, Dr. Zahra Aftab, Dr. Shahryar, and Dr. Farina, for being here, encouraging us, and answering the questions of our students and faculty. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining in.
Thank you, Rabia.
Thank you, and see you guys in the next session. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone. Allah
Having
Hafiz.
us.
Hafiz.
Hafiz.